Senate Democrats introduced their infrastructure proposal at a Capitol Hill news conference. They're calling for rolling back recently passed tax cuts to pay for $1 trillion in new spending for roads, bridges, public transportation, and rural broadband. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer begins this half-hour event.
Good morning. Well, shall we say, since it's approaching St. Patrick's Day, top of the morning. I am Irish in my heart and Hibernian Man of the Year. When I got the award, I said, God bless America. Only in America could the Hibernian Man of the Year be Chuck Schumer. Okay. Anyway, we are not here to talk about the great Irish people as much as we love them. Okay, I want to thank everyone for being here. Now, last January, we Senate Democrats unveiled our $1 trillion infrastructure plan and sent it to the President. We said it was one of the areas we could certainly work with the President. When he called me a week after winning the election, that was the first thing we talked about. Unfortunately, it took a year for the administration to unveil a plan, and the plan they unveiled just doesn't come close to doing what America needs. It relies on $200 billion in federal funds, largely financed by cutting existing infrastructure programs, and on local governments and the private sector to make up the vast bulk of infrastructure building we so desperately need here in America. Robbing Peter to pay Paul a pittance won't do nearly enough to rebuild our infrastructure. And as Penn Wharton found out, it would spur only 2% or $30 million of the $1.5 million new investment. Isn't that incredible? 2%, $30 million? It's another poorly thought out plan from this administration. They don't seem to be able to get their act together and put together real policy, whatever it is. So the $30 million that Penn Wharton found is a far cry from the $3 trillion that the American Society of Civil Engineers says is needed to repair our nation's ailing and aging infrastructure. What it will do instead, what the administration plan will do, is lead to Trump tolls across the country as private developers stick commuters with the bill for the few projects that actually get built. So we Democrats have a better deal to offer the American people. Rather than cutting existing infrastructure projects to pay for a paltry program, we want to roll back the Republican tax giveaways to big corporations and the wealthy and invest that money instead in job-creating infrastructure. Our plan would do three things compared to the President. First, create many more jobs than the Trump plan. Second, build many more projects than the Trump plan. And third, build the infrastructure America actually needs, not just what Republican donors and private investors can profit from. We're proposing to put the top rate back to 39.6%, restore the AMT for the very wealthiest Americans, restore the 2017 estate tax rules that impact only the very richest families, close the carried interest loophole, and bring the corporate tax rate to 25% to fund $1 trillion in real infrastructure investments. Our plan actually, they don't have it here, but it creates $1.022 trillion of spending for infrastructure for middle-class jobs. Over 10 million middle-class jobs we estimate would happen. What will we invest in? Well, we're proposing a truly modern infrastructure plan that would build everything from roads and bridges to schools to airports to high-speed internet and more. This isn't your grandfather's infrastructure plan. In addition to the traditional types of projects we've built in this country, water, sewer, highways, bridges, we're going to build infrastructure of the 21st century, providing $40 billion of universal high-speed internet. Franklin D. Roosevelt said every rural home should have electricity back in the 1930s. We say in the 21st century, every rural home and every inner city home should have high-speed internet. It's a necessity. Only with real direct investment to federal dollars are we going to see the kind of transformational projects that we need built. Only with the kind of investment will rural America see the projects it needs built, because no private developer is going to go to rural America. There's just not enough traffic to pay the tolls. Only with the kind of investment we have will we create the millions of middle-class jobs that we so need in this country. And as we've said from day one, we Democrats want to work with the President and our Republican colleagues on infrastructure, but we want to do it in a real way that actually produces results, not the kind of proposal the President made, which has gone over with a big thud. Not even Republicans are excited about his plan. We hope the President will move away from his plan and come much further in our direction so we can get something real done for the American people. Senator Leahy.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader. You know, he's absolutely right in what the Leader has said. This, the Trump infrastructure plan falls far short of what's needed to address our crumbling infrastructure. In the Appropriations Committee, there's one thing that has Republicans and Democrats who are talking together and want to do something. We need real investments in road, bridges, and broadband, and especially, as you said, in inner cities and rural areas. But they comes up with an illusory plan to be funded on the backs of working Americans by raising new Trump tolls. The broadband, I remember my grandparents being so excited when they got telephone and electricity 100 years ago at their home in Vermont. But this is smoke and mirrors. It's worse than just smoke and mirrors. It's a talking point for the President, but it does nothing. His budget, and this is what we're looking at appropriations, cuts transportation and housing and urban development programs by 29%. We don't need cuts in those programs. We need real investments. And rural America, can you imagine putting toll bridges and toll roads? They're not going to work there. And these are things where the country has to come together to build. So our $1 trillion investment in the American people and our economy is part of America's future. It's real investments. It's not flim-flam and fumes. The Trump plan is flim-flam and fumes, and it's not going to go anywhere. We don't rely on Trump tolls. That might help wealthy developers. It doesn't help Americans. Cash-strapped states cannot bear more. We need a real investment. We need a real investment that makes infrastructure what it should be. Not only makes for a better America, a better economy, but it creates a lot more jobs than toll roads might. Thank you. I think next.
Senator Wyden. And Senator Sanders is chairing or ranking member of Budget Committee, so we'll call him next if nobody minds.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. What we are proposing is to lift America's infrastructure out of disrepair by ensuring that multinational corporations and the fortunate few pay their fair share. Now, last year, Republicans unanimously chose to spend over $1 trillion on slashing taxes for exactly those people and businesses. And now, apparently, they are out scrounging around, looking under the sofas, trying to find some spare change in order to pay for our infrastructure. In fact, only a few months ago, Finance Committee Republicans passed up a golden opportunity with bipartisan roots to redirect taxes on overseas earnings to invest in infrastructure. We could have used, and it could have been bipartisan because we spent a lot of time working on this, using repatriated dollars from overseas that were stashed there because of our flawed tax laws. We could have used a significant portion of that money to pay for roads and bridges and highways, and yet when this proposal came to our committee for consideration in this inherently Republican tax bill, they said no to something that had bipartisan roots. and would make for a very different infrastructure debate right now. Under the leadership of Mitch McConnell and Chairman Hatch, Republicans instead rigged the tax code to ensure taxes from offshore earnings would go straight into the pockets of executives and wealthy shareholders around the world. And we know that because we are documenting the extraordinary number of stock buybacks right now. So they made a choice. And in fact, today, what Senate Democrats are doing is announcing a different choice, a choice which we believe really meets the needs of our country. And I want to focus just for a quick minute on the difference between how we're going about our job and how they have. They have come up with budgetary flim-flam. When you look at how they have put together their numbers, there is no there there. What we chose to do, all of us working with the Democratic leader, we sat down with the congressional scorekeepers and we spent the time crunching the numbers, actually going through the nuts and bolts so that we can say to the American people, you want to talk about who's being fiscally responsible? We're the ones being fiscally responsible because we said we're not going to be part of this budgetary flim-flam and pretend you can pay for roads and bridges just out of thin air. We actually crunched the numbers, and that, I think, illustrates the difference between the parties. One last point. On some of the most egregious matters, the Republicans just aren't telling the truth. For example, they have made a big production out of how they're closing the carried interest loophole. The fact is they have not done it. The president said he would do it in the campaign. Mr. Mnuchin came to the Finance Committee and said he was going to do it. Now they've got all kinds of ways to shroud what they're doing. They say they got a fix for hedge funds. But the fact is this egregious tax loophole is something that we actually closed. We restored the estate tax. So the fact of the matter is there is a big contrast between the parties now where we offer something that's real, something that's paid for, something that reflects American priorities. And on the other side, when we wanted a bipartisan approach and there was a chance to have it, our colleagues weren't willing to do it. Thank you, Leader.
Ron. Senator Sanders.
Thanks, Chuck. We are the United States of America. We are the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. And yet from Vermont to California, people look around them and what they're finding is their roads and their bridges and their water systems and their wastewater plants are falling apart. They are finding that the American Society of Civil Engineers now gives us a D+ in terms of the state of our infrastructure, and they tell us that we're going to have to spend $2 trillion above current levels to just get our infrastructure in good repair. In my own state of Vermont, Senator Leahy and I represent, we need $700 million a year through 2018 just to get our roads into a state of decent repair. 30% of our bridges are obsolete or structurally deficient. Our small community drinking water systems need $510 million over the next 20 years, and our wastewater and stormwater facilities need an additional $156 million in needed repairs and upgrades. The fact of the matter is that the American people understand, whether they are Republican, Democrat, progressive, or conservative, that in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, where we used to lead the world in our infrastructure, we are now falling further and further behind many, many other countries. Now is the time to rebuild America. Now is the time to create 10 to 15 million decent paying jobs. Now is the time to restore pride in rural America that has desperate needs, in urban America that has desperate needs. Unfortunately, the Trump plan, as you have heard, is a sham. It is a fraud. We need a real investment for real jobs to rebuild this infrastructure, and that is what this plan does.
Thank you, and thanks for your brevity. Senator Nelson.
So you see what happens when you don't have bipartisanship? what you have is one party creating a tax bill in our tax writing committee, the finance committee, ramming it down the throat of everybody, excluding the other party from any participation. Oh, would it have been bipartisanship? Because what would have happened in the tax bill is what you're being presented today. The corporate tax would have been cut. It would have been cut substantially, 10 points, from 35 to 25. Reasonable things would have been done on estate taxes. And all of those things would have produced revenue. $1 trillion worth of revenue that then could have been used for infrastructure. My state grows at 1,000 people a day net. We are in so much need of infrastructure, and you can't toll yourself out of this problem. Florida needs an infrastructure bill.
Thank you, Bill. Senator Stabenow.
Well, thank you. And I'm here because I'm very excited about this plan. I can't think of much that's more important than the idea of creating 15 million great paying middle-class jobs and rebuilding America. And this is great for Michigan. We actually have running jokes that aren't so funny anymore about the roads in Michigan, where certain ones that you drive down, like Mound Road in Macomb County, if you survive it, people tweet out, "I just survived Mound Road one more time." The problem is that you end up paying for all kinds of damage to your tires and axles and so on, and it's not so funny anymore when people are paying thousands of dollars just to try to drive to work. So I'm very excited about this. It's responsible, it's paid for, it creates jobs, it rebuilds America. And I specifically want to speak to the rural provisions that I was so pleased our Agriculture Committee was able to contribute to. I grew up in a little town in northern Michigan, and we have great infrastructure needs, not only for roads and bridges, but water and sewer systems. We also have a need to modernize our ports and waterways. And in the Great Lakes states, that means what's called the Soo Locks, that's up at the St. Lawrence Seaway, that brings the major shipping industry into the Great Lakes. It brings raw materials for manufacturing. It takes agricultural products out around the world. We have a lock that was built in World War II. We're on borrowed time. We need to be adding another lock with it. Our plan does that. So our plan is about creating jobs, not only jobs building infrastructure, but jobs that are going to help us be able to keep agriculture moving, keep manufacturing moving, and keep America moving. And the final thing I would say, we invest $40 billion in new funding for high-speed internet. This is not a frill. We're talking about basic infrastructure in communities, whether it's the hospital, the school, the small business, the farmer, the student. High-speed internet, which in Michigan right now, about 1 million people don't have access to it, not only in rural areas, but in our inner cities as well. This is about the economy. It's about 21st century infrastructure. And I'm excited because this is about the future, and this is something that we should all lean in on and get done for the American people.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell. All of our ranking members of our major committee, Senator Brown is expected, have been here.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. It's great to join my colleagues, and I want to thank you for your tremendous focus on infrastructure. 2 years ago, you went very far in discussions within Speaker Ryan on how to finance an infrastructure bill. Yes. And last January, the first thing the leader said was, we are willing to work with the White House, and proposed an outline of an infrastructure proposal and asked the White House to make that the #1 priority. Both of those ideas were rejected, and yet Leader Schumer still remains very dedicated to infrastructure, and we appreciate that. It's unfortunate we don't have a White House partner who wants to make infrastructure the major priority it needs to be. The state of Washington and Seattle, I can tell you, needs infrastructure, whether it's transportation, our ports, or our electricity grid. A major investment in infrastructure will grow our economy and create more jobs. We need to upgrade our power lines, build smarter buildings, make an investment in the energy workforce, and to also protect our grid from cybersecurity attacks. We learned from previous infrastructure investment in grid technology, $1 billion of investment created $7 billion in economic output and 50,000 new jobs. The energy review by the Department of Energy says we need 1.5 million new energy jobs that have to be filled by 2030, and these are high-paying jobs. The investments we've already made in training and skilling the energy workers for the future are getting $30,000 more in income than previous energy workers. So we need to make the investment in the grid and in the energy development to protect a growing internet economy where so much transactions happening online, and we need to protect the United States of America from cyber attacks from state entities such as the Russians by making an investment now and making it a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. And batting cleanup, the head of our EPW, the ranking member of our EPW committee, who's had a lot of say in this proposal, Senator Carper.
Thanks, Leader. Good morning, everybody. Some of you have heard me ask the question, what is the role of government? What is the role of government? And Lincoln once answered that question with this answer. He said, the role of government is to do for the people what they cannot do for themselves. I believe a major role of government is we don't create jobs in government. What we do is working with others, private sector, state and local government. We create a nurturing environment for job creation. Access to capital, access to decision makers, public safety, water, sewer, transportation. Those are some of the ingredients for a nurturing environment for job creation. When the president was elected and said at his inauguration how important investing in our infrastructure, transportation, roads, highways, bridges, rail, airports, ports, internet, I cheered quietly. But when I saw what they really had in mind, I mourned. I mourned. For years, we have paid for roads, highways, and bridges on a user fee basis. What they propose is to sort of turn that on its head. Instead of the federal government providing roughly 80% of the support for capital costs and across the country for roads, highways, bridges, we're going to ask the state to cover 80% of the cost. A huge shift in responsibility. I'm all for sharing the responsibility, but this reminds me a little bit of, in the scripture in the New Testament, the story of the fishes and the loaves, where you take, like, what was it, 5 or 7 loaves and a couple of fish and you feed 5,000 people. The idea to somehow take, in this case, $200 billion and turn that into $1.5 trillion and basically say we think the state and local governments are going to come up with that, most of that $1.5 trillion is a reinvention of common sense and reality. The administration says we're going to help pay for our roads, highways, bridges, and other parts of the infrastructure by moving toward public-private partnerships. In the last 30 years, we've had 60 of those. We've had 60. If we were to increase that by tenfold over the next 30 years, probably not likely, we still wouldn't be close to where we need to be. The administration says we need to do more environmental streamlining. We actually, if you looked at the and permitting reform, if you actually look, we did that in 2012. We did it again in 2015. Is there more to do? There may be more to do. But you know what we've not done? We've not implemented what we adopted in 2012. We've not implemented what we adopted in 2015. We're not putting in charge the resources, either the financial resources or the people, to make sure that we do what we pledged to do in 2012 and 2015. The last thing I would say is this. Things that are worth having are worth paying for. Now, some of our Republican friends may not care for what we're proposing as a pay-for. I asked 4 questions when discussing tax reform. 1, is it fair? 2, does it foster economic growth or impede it? 3, does it simplify the tax code or make it more complex? And 4, what does it do to the deficit? On each 4 of those questions, this proposal is honest, and I think it's forthright. P.S. Ultimately, we're going to move away from the current way of sort of hodgepodge way of funding roads, highways, and bridges and other parts of our infrastructure, especially in transportation. We're going to move toward, in the roads, highways, bridges, we're going to move for the next probably 20 years, something we call vehicle miles traveled. We're piloting down now in 7 states. In the 2015 legislation, we called for pilots. We're piloting it now in 7 states. And eventually, we'll pilot it for the nation, and eventually, that's going to be a big approach. And that may be 20 years, probably will be 20 years till we're there. In the meantime, what do we do? What do we do? And I think the Democrats, under the leadership of this man right here, presented an honest, I think a responsible approach to filling the gap for the next 10, 20 years until we're ready to move to a vehicle miles traveled approach. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom. Well done. We're ready for your questions on this subject first.
Senator Schumer, thank you. So, in the context of the tariff proposal, do you see this as an opportunity
Good try.
to make, do you see it as an opportunity for the U.S., if the President goes ahead with these tariffs, to make the types of steel and aluminum that are needed in infrastructure projects, or that this could adversely affect?
Our proposal has very strong Buy America provisions. When the federal government is paying for highways, roads, bridges, power grids, the stuff ought to be made in America. That's federal tax dollars. And Tammy Baldwin has been a leader in this, and her proposal is in our bill. Yes?
Mr. Leader, Democrats have spent the last few months talking about the Republican tax plan as being $1.5 trillion of deficit spending.
Right.
Your plan is basically proposing to take 2/3 of that deficit spending and just spend it on infrastructure instead of tax cuts. What do you say to that, that it shows some hypocrisy on the
We have always, throughout the history, since Henry Clay, the federal government has financed roads and bridges because the external benefits are far greater. In other words, you can put a toll on a road for a truck that goes there, but when a new factory locates right near the road and employs 1,000 people and pays income tax and sales tax and buys products, that's not accounted for. So we believe that infrastructure is a place where the federal government should make an investment. We think it's a lot better investment of the federal government in infrastructure than cutting taxes on the wealthiest people and the biggest corporations.
And Mike, we closed specifically major loopholes. I mean, the carried interest loophole, which the president campaigned as saying he was going to close, he didn't. Now the Republicans are falsely claiming that they did. They didn't. We rolled the estate tax back. The fact is, we are closing specific and major loopholes.
Yes, in the back.
Okay,
we'll call on both of you.
The biggest infrastructure
One with a lot of hair, one with not so much.
The biggest infrastructure program, Gateway, which you met with the president on several times, is now under fire by the administration. What do you think that they're opposed to Gateway now? And do you think anything's retaliation against you for opposing Trump initiatives?
Look, I'm not going to get into the politics of it. Gateway is one of the very most important infrastructure programs in our country. It affects 50 million people in the Northeast Corridor, 25% of our economy. If those 2 tunnels that are now under the Hudson River are no longer functional, there'll be a recession in the entire country, not just in New York, New Jersey, and even the Northeast Corridor. So we have to get it done. The good news is we have bipartisan support for getting it done. And from everything I hear, it's all systems move ahead, despite what the president had to say.
To what extent are you guys planning to run on this in the fall? How big a part of your campaign message?
We believe in jobs. We believe in the middle class. We believe in the economy. There's no better way to create jobs and improve the economy than infrastructure. So this will be a major thing we will talk about. And the contrast between tax cuts for the wealthiest people as opposed to middle class jobs is one that we will forcefully advocate in the fall. Do you want to say? Yeah, Maria, go ahead.
I mean, obviously we need infrastructure financing to continue to grow, but the fact that the tax bill made affordable housing worse in the United States of America when we have an opioid crisis and a homelessness crisis, I guarantee you that everyone's going to be talking about the fact that they made it harder harder to deal with this crisis and gave the money away to major corporations. So I wouldn't want to be running, if I was them, in a city or, whether you're in Texas or wherever you are, Nevada, talking about how you passed tax breaks and then made it more expensive to deal with affordable housing.
Which is in our plan.
Can I add?
Yes, please.
Yeah. When people go to the polls this fall, they're going to be thinking about a lot of things. Do I have a job? Prospects for a job for my kids. One of the things I hope people think about is that we spend 2 full days, 48 hours, every year sitting in traffic. That's on average across the country. Texas A&M has actually run the numbers. They do it every year. You literally sit there. We're not moving. We're not going 5 or 10 miles an hour. We're just sitting there. The average family in this country spends $500 per year fixing their tires, changing tires, axles, steering, $500 a year. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. I go home on the train just about every night. And on the train, and when I get home, people, almost every day, somebody says to me, we need for you guys to work together down here. They want us to work together. I think most American people think and see one of the ways we could work together will actually do something about our roads, highways, our bridges, our ports, and airports, and so forth. And there's a way to do it honestly, and there's a way just to pretend that we're doing it. We can't just pretend. We can't just say it's only make-believe. We got to make it real. And I think this makes it real.
And as the more people learn about the tax bill, the less popular it's becoming. It had a bump in January. We're now finding in our states the popularity is receding because people are seeing that that money is not going to jobs. So the contrast is great. When it goes to stock buybacks that enrich wealthy corporations and the top ends of shareholders, people don't like it. When they hear it increases the deficit, and now Ryan and others are proposing cut Social Security and Medicare, they don't like it. We aim to use this as a contrast. Here's what you can do with that money that really makes a difference to you and makes your life better and creates jobs. So we're very positive about going full steam ahead, showing our plan and the contrast with what the Republicans want to do with the money. It's a loser for them.
And apropos of the leader's point, the contrast will also include all the efforts that we made to be bipartisan. The first thing, for example, out of the gate, the leader, our caucus, sent a letter. Basically, the first sentence was, we want a bipartisan bill. We had a big group of moderates who wanted a bipartisan bill. So actually, when you sit down with the number crunchers and do your work, do your homework, then you're really doing what citizens consider to be bipartisanship. So apropos of this fall, not only will we have a sharp contrast between them and us, but we'll be able to say, look at all the missed opportunities, starting with repatriation, where we were for bipartisanship, and they basically opted for partisanship through reconciliation.
Last question. Yes. We'll take two. We'll take two.
Grounds?
On
Tiger Grounds?
Yeah, they cut it out in the budget.
McConnell and some of the other senior Republicans said they've gotten the heads up from Elaine Chao that their states are getting Tiger Grants. And I wanted to ask how you and other Democrats are...
Well, I'm all for Tiger Grants, but in the new budget they propose, they eliminate it. One of the ways they're going to pay for this, robbing Peter to pay Paul, for their infrastructure proposal, is knock out the Tiger Grants. So I'd ask you to ask what some of our senators, Republican, who are getting Tiger Grants say about this year's budget.
Can I get your reaction to your constituent, Gary Cohn, leaving the White House? And as somebody who had a reputation for working across the aisle a little bit, does that departure make it harder to get things done with the White House?
One of the problems here is the White House is getting hollowed out, and the number of people capable of doing things, doing real things, whether you agree or disagree ideologically, is getting smaller and smaller, and they seem unable to recruit new people to take these jobs. So the kind of mess-ups we've seen this past week, I think we're going to see over and over and over again. The president's erratic style. I didn't vote for Jeff Sessions, but I think it's a symbol to everybody. What he did to his best friend Jeff Sessions is don't go work there. And I've heard story after story of capable people in the Gary Cohn mold trying to be recruited by the White House, and no one wants to go. Thank you, everybody. You should, okay, I'll do one or two more.
When you said mess up, Senator, were you referring to the tariffs, or is that a mess up? When you referred to mess ups this
Well,
week,
here's what I think about the tariffs. I said this, I spoke on the floor about this morning. I agree with, I totally agree, wholeheartedly agree with President Trump's instinct to go after China. China's rapacious. They don't play by the free trade rules. They gnaw away every day at our economy by not letting our good products in, by stealing our intellectual property, by buying companies that are good. The trouble is the execution of the plan didn't do what his instinct said do. They caused far more harm to countries that aren't rapacious in their trading, where we benefit from trading. Canada, where we have a surplus, Western Europe. And so they ought to not let all of these academics who just say anytime you try to do anything on trade, it's protectionist. They ought to not let that deter them, but they ought to put together a real plan that works. Last question.
Senator, to go off topic again, I wanted to ask
That's
you
okay.
about the news from last night that former porn star Stormy Daniels is suing the president.
Yeah, I'm not.
And specifically, I want to ask you, though, about part of the lawsuit that says the president's personal lawyer has continued his attempts at silencing her, including as recently as February.
I'm not going to comment on that issue. We want to stick to infrastructure. Thank you. Good answer.